Really humbling on behalf of the Los Angeles City Fire Department to have this award for all the hardworking men and women. Needless to say, it has been a very, very difficult year for us. We did everything we could to the best of our ability. It's been also traumatic, and so much of wildfires are environmentally wind driven, and so it's so important to have people come together and celebrate the storytellers and to have discussions about the environment, about the increase of wildfires in severity and duration and frequency that we're seeing. And so we're really honored to be a small role of all first responders and to accept this award.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live! Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live! And things suck!
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Man on Fire. Eric Scott. Eric Scott is the real hero. Let's be honest, guys. It's a good thing that he's out there partying, accepting awards, bitching about climate change, making his job so much harder, because you know what? He's the real hero of the Palisades fire. My goodness, guys. I can't take this long in between live streams. I really can't, because too much happens. We've got way too much going on. We've got the LAPD. They have joined the list of agencies that have done their exhaustive after-action report for the Palisades fire. We are, now moving into the 11th month. It's like it's only now coming out. We also have questions about whether or not the Rekindle theory is real or not. Are Rekindles bullshit? What do you guys think? A week-long holdover fire in Southern California, is that even impossible? We have rumors of a second arsonist on the Palisades fire. It wasn't a Rekindle after all. We have another arsonist who started the fire, and they've not been caught. Is that true? Is Gavin Newsom, is the Gav Hands finally doing some prescribed fire? And guys, do we have a big cover-up? Do we have a big cover-up? I'm telling you, man, it's starting to feel more and more like it. I'm going to tell you why. We'll get into the details of why this is starting to feel like a big cover-up, like a full-on mafia-style cover-up. Now, we saw that clip at the beginning. That was Eric Scott. He's the public information officer for the Los Angeles Fire Department. I don't envy him this year, I'll be honest. But ever since we've had this deluge of reporting on the fact that his firefighters walked away from a smoldering fire, and it was determined by the ATF that this was not properly put out. The LA Times did an article, and we're going to get to that, but he hasn't said anything. It's been a week now. He hasn't said a thing. You would think as a PIO, your job is to put out fires, but apparently the LAFD is not very good at putting out fires, the real ones or the PR fires. So he hasn't said anything. I'm starting to think that there's something going on here. Now, a lot of people are lawyered up, okay? So maybe that's the factor, but just seeing him at that award show, accepting awards, and whining about, oh, we've had a really tough year. Have you? Well, what about the people who lost everything? Do they have a tough year? Like, are they smiling at awards shows? This is such a bad look for someone who's in charge of PR for this agency. I think that was a huge faux pas. That was really, really bad. Now, on to what he was saying. He did what they've all done. What they've all done. Blame it on climate. Do you guys remember this article from the LA Times? Do you remember this? California's 2025 wildfire season was already going to be dangerous. Trump has made it worse. Damn that orange man. The orange man brings you orange skies, as you can see in this article. Now, I always love back testing these kinds of panicky predictive articles. Well, I've told you guys this before. So, for those of you who are new here, I spent about 6 years filming my documentary Hot Shot. So I spent 6 years embedded with hotshot crews, and these are the most seasoned veterans in the wildfire community. They are true wildfire whisperers. They know fire better than anybody. Sorry, cunning Phil Cunningham. They might even know wildfire better than you. You with all your fancy degrees and leaving the live stream early. Now, here's the one consistent thing that I noticed about guys who really understand wildfires. Whenever I would ask them, hey, what do you think is going to happen this season? They all had the same exact response. We'll see. It was always 2 words. We'll see. And that's a very, very wise thing to do because you never really know what you're going to get. So, for example, let's say you have a heavy rain year. You could have really high fuel moisture levels, and that delays your fire season and, puts a lid on it. You could also get an overabundance of fuels, right? So you have this huge grass crop from your rains. And so then that rain actually ends up screwing you so much harder. That's what happened between 2019 and 2020. 2019 was a very, very tiny fire year. They had a ton of snow, a ton of rain. What ended up happening was it created a huge amount of grass and new fuels that then cured out in 2020 when the drought started. And the thing is, 2020, even though that was the year that the drought started and the drought got progressively worse over the next 2 years, the fire seasons got progressively smaller over the next 2 years. So sometimes drought can actually help you out with fire season, especially when it's back to back, because you don't get that new regrowth. So 2021 was a big year, but then it was half the size of 2020. And then 2022 was a tiny year. I think it was like 330,000 acres. That's very small for California. But that was the peak of the drought. That's what everybody was panicking. All the reservoirs were empty. They all ended up being totally full a couple of years later. But the point is, sometimes the drought can actually help you in that you're not getting that new crop of growth. Okay, so there's less fuels. This is why you can't just look at one metric and say, we're going to have a bad fire year. You actually don't know. You really don't know. And so all the seasoned guys, they will always say, we'll see. What does the LA Times always say? It's going to be the worst year ever due to climate change. They always do this. It's going to be the worst year ever. And I will tell you from personal experience that a lot of wildland firefighters hate talking to the LA Times. They hate talking to reporters in general, but specifically the LA Times would always be trying to coach them when they're interviewing them into giving them some kind of a panicky quote. And, wildland firefighters are not prone to panic. So they would never really indulge in it. And so they would always notice that when they would read the article the next day, these firefighters would notice that they totally took me out of context. Like, I'm not worried about the fire season. I'm worried about just getting enough overtime so I can pay my bills. Like, that's what they're really worried about. But they try to reframe it to make it seem like firefighters are worried. But then they leave off the rest of the quote. It's like, yeah, I'm worried about paying my bills. They're not worried about the fire season. It is what it is. And they never really know. But the LA Times likes to always make these predictions. And of course, they always have to make it political. They have to make it about Trump, which is it's so bizarre. I don't know what this obsession is with the president. I remember when people were blaming Joe Biden for the Palisades and Eaton fires. And it's like, yeah, it happened while he was president, but like, it's not his fault. Like, honestly, he's got nothing to do with it. It's so absurd. All that said, look at this is by Haley Smith. She's probably been in a lot of wildfires. Forecasts call for significant fire potential in California this year, given by hot and dry conditions. At the same time, President Trump has weakened 3 federal agencies that play key roles in the state's ability to prepare for and respond to fires. Is that true? This was during like a lot of the Doge panic. Experts say changes at the U.S. Forest Service, FEMA, and NOAA could put California at a dangerous disadvantage during fire season. Okay, so the NIFC calls for above normal fire activity across much of California and the Northwest through September. The government outlook warns of significant fire potential in Northern California, Sierra Nevada, and several of the state's coastal areas due to a largely pronounced warm and dry trend. Now, how did this actually pan out, guys? Well, here's what we have on the year. 522,289 acres burned. This is a small fire season. And in Northern California, it was particularly dead. Like, the biggest fires that you had were in Santa Barbara County, right? It was the Gifford fire and the Madre fire. They were like 80,000 acre fires. That was a huge chunk of your burning. And of course, we had our big catastrophes in January, which, I would tack that on to the last fire season because it happened, before we got the season-ending rains. And that's how you do it. You don't do it by the calendar. You do it by when you get your season-ending rains. All that said, you've got prescribed fire going on in Northern California. This fire season is dead, dude, and it's been dead for a long time. So clearly this didn't pan out. And also, the way that they frame this, the way that they're framing all this stuff, talking about these agencies and how President Trump is destroying the Forest Service, and Gavin Newsom always echoes this. It's not true. So they're in the process of consolidating into the National Wildland Fire Service. So they're doing a consolidated Fed fire. Okay, that doesn't mean that we're suddenly getting rid of all these firefighters out of the U.S. Forest Service. They're just sort of transitioning the overhead structure, the org structure for who sends these dudes to these fires. It's really that simple. They're actually tripling the budget for fire suppression. Okay, so if anything, they're just ramping up the existing system on steroids. These are much needed changes. I think a lot of people, even though they're a little trepidatious about change, these are things that people have been calling for in the wildfire industry for a long, long time. Now, they say these three agencies are critical components of California's wildfire response capabilities, from forecasting and forest management to firefighting and disaster relief, weakening them at the start of fire season and at a moment when human-caused climate change. Just see how they have to do this? This is like a tick. This is like this is their fealty to Admiral Zorg. It's like they have to put this in. And clearly, they didn't get the memo. They did not get the memo that climate change is over. It's not a thing anymore. Bill Gates said it. It's not going to lead to humanity's demise. And the argument that I've always made is it's not that climate change isn't a factor. It's not that climate change is real. It's just you guys are spending so much time, energy, and effort on stuff that's not going to have a material difference on wildfire when you could be removing fuels, and that is going to save you from a wildfire. So it's not, for me, it's not about like arguing about climate change so much as arguing about an opportunity cost, right? There's an opportunity cost if you spend your time doing something that's not going to have a material impact on protecting you from fire. Now, I went to my storage unit and I pulled out an old family photo album that I forgot that I had. Coming up on Thanksgiving, this is, man. So this is in the Palisades. This was Thanksgiving. I remember this. We were all playing football out in the street at my aunt's house. So it's from left to right. It's my dad, my cousin Victor, my brother Josh, my grandpa, my late grandpa, rest his soul, Milton. That's me. I was the baby of the family in the Zildjian t-shirt. My cousin Elia and my uncle Jonathan. We were all playing football on Thanksgiving out in the streets in the Palisades. You know that expression, you can never go home again? All of this is gone. So my aunt's place is gone. My cousin's houses are gone. My grandma's place survived, but everything around it burned. She lived at Edgewater Towers. That's Sunset PCH. But yeah, man, seeing this picture kind of brought it home for me in a weird way. It's weird how old pictures can do this to you. But dude, the amount of loss from the Palisades fire, it's like I don't think we've really soaked it in how bad it is. And that's just the material loss. But the one thing that I wanted to point out in this picture that I think is interesting. Everybody always says, "Oh, the Palisades is a bunch of rich fucks. They'll be fine. They're fine. They're rich." Look at the cars in the background. I think that's my dad's Volvo right there in the corner. We were middle class, to say the least. And that's what the Palisades used to be. Now, of course, all my family members who got burned out of the Palisades this year, they're never going to be able to afford to come back. They're never, ever in their lifetimes going to be able to afford to come back. This perception that the Palisades is this super wealthy enclave, yeah, it's going to be now, because the only people who are ever going to be able to afford to live there are people who can buy with cash and buy with the inflated real estate values now. But keep in mind, a lot of people are going to be hurting from this for a very, very long time. And it reminded me to check in on something because we're coming up on the 7-year anniversary of the Woolsey fire. Now, by virtue of the fact that my parents got divorced when I was young, I lived in multiple places, right? So you'll hear me say, oh, I grew up in the Palisades. I grew up in Santa Barbara. I grew up in Thousand Oaks. Well, where did you grow up, dude? Well, that's the thing. When my parents split up, my dad left the West Side and moved up to Santa Barbara. And then my mom moved to Malibu Lake. Malibu Lake got burned over in the Woolsey fire 7 years ago. And if you look at it today, some of my neighbors' homes, my former neighbors, because when I was living there, we had the 93 Old Topanga fire burn through not Malibu Lake, but Malibu Canyon. And so we experienced wildfire there. But the thing is, it didn't impact us. The Woolsey fire hit Malibu Lake really hard. But here's the thing, guys. Look at some of my old neighbors. I remember we used to walk past this home every day on our evening walks, and we'd go look at the dam. Gone. This is just across the street from the clubhouse where we would play baseball. My brother and I would play baseball every weekend. All gone, still just footprints. This is from one of the real estate listings trying to sell this burned out property. Look at that. This is 7 years later. 7 years later. And look at this view, by the way. Malibu Lake was my favorite place to live. I loved this place. It was paradise. It's a 15, 20-minute drive to Malibu, and you live on the lake. We would go fishing. We had like total Huck Finn adventures every summer, and they cannot sell this property for $500,000. Guys, 69 homes burned in Malibu Lake. 69, that's it. And 7 years later, you have all of these homes that are still sitting here. What do you think is going to happen with the Palisades with 7,000 structures gone? This place is not getting rebuilt in your lifetime. In your lifetime. Now, speaking of the Palisades, we have the Los Angeles Police Department. They have joined the chat with their after action report. We've got all these agencies providing their after action reports, except for the state, which is interesting. Did you know that state investigators still have not contacted anybody at the LAFD? Did you know that? Gavin Newsom has been talking. Now, I know this because we have spoken to people at the LAFD. And they said, yeah, nobody's talked to us. And I've got a story for you later on that's going to blow your friggin' mind. So LAPD came out with their after action report. Now, obviously, this isn't necessarily going to be as compelling as the LAFD, right? Or LA County Fire, because we want to know what went wrong with the firefight. But remember, guys, 12 people died. And law enforcement is primarily responsible for making notifications. Oftentimes you'll have sheriff's department or police officers going door to door, doing the door knocking, trying to get people out while firefighters go and try to fight fire. So they are very important, especially with a high fatality fire such as this. And as it turns out, they had some very serious problems. There were a few things in this report. A lot of it's, relatively standard, but there were a few things that stood out that are very alarming. Number one, this is what stood out. Coordination between LAPD and LAFD was poor, considering the two agencies were supposed to be in unified command. Just add this to the list of fuck-ups on this fire. This is why we're not going to let it go, because guys, this is not how a fire is supposed to be run. I'm telling you. The level of just basic screw-ups on this fire are so egregious that I can't even begin to describe them. They forgot to anchor the fire. Unbelievable. Though both agencies were co-located at the same command posts, the two departments did not collectively establish a unified command structure or identify shared objectives, missions, or strategies. Is this starting to explain why there was that clusterfuck on Palisades Drive, where inexplicably they were not allowing cars to leave the area? It was totally open on PCH, and yet nobody was allowed to turn. Now, fortunately, the situation wasn't too dangerous. Had I been there, there's no way I would have been like getting out of my car and running away. But unfortunately, police officers and firefighters told all these civilians to get out of their car and run for their lives. And so people left their cars, took their keys, and then, of course, you had that log jam. You had to get a dozer to push them out. All of this, just that alone, I'm seeing like $200,000 Mercedes getting bulldozed. Okay, that should never happen. Okay, it should never ever happen. I'm sorry, it's inexcusable. Moving on. This is where it starts to get really dicey. The LAPD also noted that many resources were assigned to a visit from the President of the United States. Now, you heard me say earlier, I don't blame Joe Biden for the fire. Maybe we should. It gets worse, guys. Don't get it. California says, imagine LA during an earthquake. I'm like, dude, you guys are overdue, by the way. You are overdue. I remember I was living at Malibu Lake. I was living at Malibu Lake when the Northridge quake hit. And it was the oddest thing. For some reason, I woke up. Let me pull up Malibu Lake real quick. I remember driving home past this place, by the way. Right past this place. I remember driving home. My mom was driving us home. And that night, the night before the Northridge quake, there were deer and raccoons and coyotes everywhere, like right around dusk, just running around aimlessly. It was bizarre. I woke up maybe 2 minutes before the earthquake hit. I sat straight up in bed. It must have been 4 a.m. or something. I sat straight up in bed and I said out loud, something bad is about to happen. And then sure enough, a minute later, I hear this rumble in the distance, and then it felt like the entire house was going to shake off its foundation. It was absolutely insane. Was that January 17th in the 90s? It's 96 or something? Man, that was scary. I was a little kid. That was super scary. 94 earthquake was exceptionally run in unified command. 4:35 a.m. See? Nailed it, dude. I swear I woke up and I sat straight up. It was like something out of The Sixth Sense. A little creepy. But yeah, that was really gnarly. Just imagine if that were to happen now. Imagine that. Can't even handle a wildfire. Now, going on to the details of this. In the reassignment of POTUS resources. So these are the resources for a ceremonial visit by the president, Joe Biden. This is also why the Gav hands happened to be in Southern California, because he was hanging out with President Biden. On January 7th, the LAPD had a large contingent of officers, including all of the department's on-duty motorcycle officers, assigned to the POTUS visit at a nearby location in West LA. At 11:30, the LAPD IC contacted the POTUS command post to request the assistance of motorcycle officers whose ability to maneuver through heavy traffic would have helped reduce the gridlock in the Palisades. Unfortunately, the POTUS command post was unable to release the motorcycle officers. Now, dude, we just talked about that cluster F on Palisades Drive. All of that traffic, and fire resources couldn't get through it. So not only did it delay the firefight, but in terms of life-saving missions from law enforcement, motorcycle cops could have weaved their way up. They could have ridden on the sidewalks too, right? They could have busted their way up there and gone and knocked on doors. To see why this is exceptionally tragic, you have to ask yourself, we had 12 fatalities, and a lot of them were old folks, right? They needed help getting out. Doesn't matter if they're notified that they have to get out. They might not be able to. They might not be ambulatory. You guys remember this? It's from the mountain fire. Here you see 2 sheriff's deputies from Ventura County. Ventura County sheriffs are outstanding. So is Ventura County Fire. Look at these guys saving lives. This is like straight out of a movie. Do you not think that just one motorcycle cop could have maybe saved a life? Right? They didn't need 2 guys for this. That one stud in the back could have handled this 100%. Do you think that if those motorcycle cops had been made available, if the POTUS visit didn't snatch up all, 65 of their motorcycle officers, what did they need 65 motorcycle officers for? None of them were available to weave up into traffic and to rescue people like this. Man, you don't even want to think about it. You don't even want to think about it because it's truly that bad. But I'm telling you, people died because they didn't have those motorcycle cops available. And the LAPD is admitting it. They're admitting it without really saying it. It's pretty devastating. But what's this fire from? What's this fire? This is the mountain fire. This is from November. This is exactly a year ago. This is today the 1 year anniversary of the mountain fire. 1 year anniversary of the mountain fire. Who remembers this, by the way? This was in like Somis and Camarillo Heights. Do you guys remember this? Do we got to do like a little a trip down memory lane? Let's do a little trip down memory lane of the mountain fire. Let's go through some of my tweets. I had some banger tweets on this one. This was a really, really, really bad fire. I said the counterpoint to that is the recent mountain fire where in an area that is prone to wind-driven fires like the Maria fire in 2019. They did not do the needed prescribed fire, and the community ended up with $6 million in agricultural losses, not to mention 100 plus homes, many of which are $1 million plus. You had some congresswoman who was like glad-handing and doing photo ops with the Gav hands. And I pointed out the fact that Congresswoman Brownlee voted against a living wage for federal wildland firefighters, including the Texas Canyon hotshots who were on scene fighting this fire for her constituents. You see a lot of patterns repeating themselves, yeah? Early on, I had predicted it was going to steamroll through Camarillo Heights, and it did, and it caused a lot of damage. Dozens of homes destroyed, really, really bad. Here's another thing. Does this look familiar? News media reporting there were 80 to 100 mile per hour gusts on the mountain fire. This did not happen. You'd have had roofs ripping off their homes. There were 48 mile per hour gusts in the area. That's gnarly enough without the hyperbole. Oftentimes, uninitiated people in media will conflate upper level winds with surface winds, which are the ones that matter. Does this sound familiar? Does this not sound like a broken record? 2 months later, in the Palisades, we have the same exact thing where everybody's saying, oh, they had 100 mile per hour hurricane force winds. Really, it was like 28 miles per hour. I'm telling you guys, like this is why I'm always doing this, because it's like, it's the same shit over and over. People have the same panicky responses. There's the same media bullshit. And it's like, you know, I post the gusts from the weather stations. And it's like, do you see anything? Oh, there's 48 miles an hour. 48. That's the biggest one we got. And most of them are not that. And those are just the gusts. But it's like, it's the same stuff repeating itself over and over and over again. This is a good shot from Brandy. This just shows you how dangerous evacuating is. Look at that. Look at that visibility there. You want to try to drive through that? And now they're stopped because you got fire raking across the road. Guys, you gotta be prepared for this stuff, because these are the kind of conditions you're gonna run into, and now they're backing up. I'm telling you, I've said it a billion times. Evacuation is like the most dangerous part of a wildfire. Look at that. They don't want that smoke. So you guys have to be prepared for this stuff. The best thing you can do is just clear out a safety zone. Clear out enough space where you can shelter in place and not be threatened. Now, look, 48 mile per hour winds we're producing. This is gnarly, guys. This is really gnarly. This is why all the hyperbole about 80 mile per hour winds, it's not necessary. This is so bad. Like 40 mile an hour winds are bad enough. Okay, that's going to give you a monster fire. But you didn't get the same level of destruction you got in the Palisades, but it was a very, very devastating fire. And the same problems. I pointed this out. $25,000 per year for property tax and homeowner insurance to live here in California. All gone. Remaining neighborhood now uninsurable. How is this sustainable? Man, all these questions just got so much more relevant just 2 months later. This is so bad. But amidst that, you still have some good stories, right? You have these sheriff's deputies saving people. Now, let's talk about the Palisades fire. I saw this tweet by James Woods. He said, yes, and there will be a monstrous class action suit, which the city will eventually settle for hundreds of millions of dollars. The lawyers will get a sizable chunk, and the Democrats will pocket the rest. Palisades victims will get nothing. All right. This is my response to it. I said the Palisades fire lawsuit is being led by the most honorable attorney you can find. That is Alexander the Great Robertson. I know him personally. He's the reason we know about all the nefarious BS on this fire, and this suit is the only source of justice for the victims like Spencer and 10,000 others. Chill. Now, speaking of Alexander the Great, I've often told you guys, this guy knows what he's doing, okay? And he is a decent and honorable man. This is him receiving an award, a life-saving citation medal from the mountain fire, because he rescued this woman whose truck caught on fire hauling a bunch of horses. That's his vehicle, I believe, this red truck, which I'm pretty sure he donated to the community brigade, by the way. So if you're having any doubts about the attorneys, or at least Trey Alexander, who is leading the master case, he's the lead attorney on the Palisades lawsuit. Look, guys, lawyers, they get a cut. They do. They get, 20% typically? But this is the only source of justice for the Palisades victims. I know everybody wants handcuffs on the Gav hands. They want handcuffs. They want to see Karen Bass frog marched. They want to see people fired. What does that do for the victims? Yeah, it's going to be satisfying. But like the major damage, besides the fatalities, the major damage, these are financial losses. People lost their homes. They lost all of their earthly possessions that they're going to have to pay through the nose to get back. They need money, okay? And the only way for them to get paid is this lawsuit. This is quite literally the only source of justice. It's the only source of justice for these people. However, that may change. That may change. We're finding out that now there is a criminal investigation, it's going to create some interesting problems for the lawsuit. Once you have a federal criminal investigation, and we'll get into it a little bit more later. Once you have that, then you've got sealed grand jury testimony. And now some of these whistleblowers from the Los Angeles Fire Department, their testimony is going to get locked up, just like that ATF report at the Department of Justice. And it's going to be untouchable. It's going to be hermetically sealed for God knows how long. How long is it going to take for them to comb through all that stuff? So fortunately, because of great people like Alexander Robertson, we've already got a head start on the feds. Before they can lock up everything and screw over this lawsuit with their criminal investigation, we've got so much evidence, so much testimony and video evidence and pictures, from residents. And I've got access to a lot of that. Now, all of that has built the case. It's built the case that this was a rekindle. This was a rekindle. But there are people who don't believe that. There are people who don't believe that. Let's go to this. Now, speaking of the feds and the Department of Justice, this was in response to when they announced that they'd arrested the commie arsonist who started the 8-acre Lockman fire. And that was the extent of his damage, right? 8 acres. And they said that this was a rekindle. The Palisades fire rekindled from the Lockman fire 6 days later. And then Dave said this. Now, Dave is a very well-respected veteran firefighter. He provides a lot of super valuable information on Twitter. He's a great follow. I recommend all you guys follow him if you care about California wildfires. He said this right away. Not buying it was a rekindle seems too convenient. In 32 years with CAL FIRE, I fought hundreds of fires like the Lockman, and I never saw a rekindle a week later. I still think it was a second arson start. And then Rivka said, I keep saying the same thing. I truly don't think Station 69 or 22 would have allowed it. No way in hell. I also keep saying that a kid in the Palisades had been setting off M80s for at least 2 years all over the Palisades. Anyone looking into him? Yes, they did look into him, just so you know. Dave replies, I was taught early to never have a rekindle. I've been on many rekindles thanks to firefighters that weren't trained like me, but they've always been the day after the fire, and we were getting plenty of phone calls reporting them. Matter of fact, with our system we had, if you got sent to the same spot within 24 hours, it was considered a rekindle. After 24 hours, it was considered a new fire and report. Now, let's get into this. I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think there was potentially a second arsonist? Barry says, I did not believe it, but now I do. Interesting. Interesting. Now, let's look into this. Dave's saying he's not buying it as a rekindle. Seems too convenient. Here's the thing. He's got a really good point. Because the fuel model in Southern California, it's not conducive to a 5-day holdover or a 6-day holdover fire. Now, a holdover that long, it's definitely more believable in like Northern California or heavy timber. Like if you're up deep in the Angeles forest, right? Up like, what's it like right on the Angeles Crest Highway. You've got heavy timber, these really dense fuels. I can 100% buy a holdover fire, not just for 6 days, but like 6 months. You can get 6-month-long holdovers. Now, I'm actually kind of with Dave on this. I was really skeptical at first about this being a rekindle because, again, that fuel model, I just couldn't imagine it like holding over for that long, you know? And I know the LA County guys, and they're so good. Now, Dave goes on to say, I was taught early on to never have a rekindle. Now, where was he getting this from? Private Fire posted this. This is great. This is from, these are from like some old tactics books. Let's see if I can get this for you. There's an infrared camera, right? Where you can spot hot spots, which they didn't with LAFD didn't use. Mop up. When the fire's been contained, the real work begins. You hear this all the time in the fire service. When the fire has been contained, the real work begins. This is how important mop up is. If all the material near the fire line is not extinguished, you run the risk of the fire rekindling and escaping. This is something you don't want to experience or contribute to. This outlines the rules of mop up. Remember, it is not uncommon that hot material could still be found on large fires months after the fire was controlled. Months. So if Dave is reading the same manual, I don't know why he's so skeptical about like if something that could last for months, how is it not lasting for a few days? They even have a picture of a guy with a dunce hat. Mop up is one of the most important phases of fire suppression because any remaining burning debris may rekindle the fire, making all previous efforts worthless. Many fires have been lost because of sloppy mop up. So why is it that we think all of a sudden this is not a thing? If we're hearing that this is really common, this is where the real work begins, and many fires have been lost due to improper mop up, why are we so skeptical? I get it though. It's a Southern California fuel model. And they're saying large fires can have stuff burning for months after the fire was controlled. Well, the Lachlan fire that was started by the arsonist, it was a very small fire. It was only 8 acres. That's a very small fire. So I'm actually kind of with Dave on this. Now, what would change the game? What would change the game on this? What would change it for me is if we had another fire in the same fuel model that was a rekindle. Was this a rekindle? Now, Ventura County Fire Department made an announcement that they're doing a big presser tomorrow, 1 year after the mountain fire, where they are going to be announcing the cause of the fire. Was this a rekindle? Are they going to be announcing tomorrow that the mountain fire, another destructive wind-driven fire, was a rekindle? Now, notice this. From November 11th, fire crews on the mountain fire in Camarillo are working on knocking out any hotspots as they try to make sure areas are safe enough for evacuated residents to return home. The fire is still only 31% contained. So, the initial attack on this fire was November 6th. And it was a one-day push. Now, forget the 38% containment. We've talked about this a million times. That number is not really reflective of, the status of the fire. The fire's been knocked down at this point. So here they are patrolling, they're doing mop-up and patrolling hotspots for days afterwards. Did we get the same thing on the Lachlan fire? Did we? Was this a rekindle? Guys, pay attention to this announcement tomorrow. And I would ask Dave, who's probably not watching this, but Dave, if you were to find out, if we were to hear that the mountain fire in a similar fuel model just a few months prior was also a rekindle, would that change your assessment of this? Are you still going to believe there is a second arsonist? What about this? Now, this is from the LA Times, I believe. And this is from actually a fire that blew through my neighborhood in 2019. This was the tick fire, burned right through my neighborhood. But because I cleared my brush, and I didn't have a problem. This is a quote from someone who's very important to the Palisades fire. One of the differences we're seeing in this fire is because it impacted that urban interface, there's a lot of fire line. So that length of fire line requires more work to go out into the black areas, into the burn areas, and extinguish all of those, said Garrett Hazelton, a fire behavior analyst for LA County Fire Department. Here's the key point. It takes a couple days to fully vet and put out all those little ember-producing hotspots. A couple days. Now, the LAFD did not stay on for a couple days. They stayed on for 1 day. They were pulling their hoses on the morning of January 2nd. Now, they tried to lie and say they stayed till the 3rd. But you've got Garrett Hazelton, who is a veteran of the LA County Fire Department. Now, he also happened to be the foreman on the hand crew that scrape on the Lockman fire. Small world, huh? He's lawyered up. He's not talking. Shocker. But yeah, he was one of the foremen in charge of. He's normally the foreman for Camp 9, I think, over in my neck of the woods in Santa Clarita. But he was picking up a shift on Camp 8. They did the scrape to help LAFD because LAFD at that point did not have a hand crew. Guys, it's just going to get spicier and spicier. I'm telling you right now. Now, this raises some serious questions for the Los Angeles Fire Department, doesn't it? Now, you had ABC. ABC News was claiming that they asked some tough questions of the Los Angeles Fire Department. Now, I want you to watch this, and I want you to tell me, do these sound like tough questions for the agency potentially responsible for letting a fire escape and burn down an entire city? You be the judge.
After months of pressing for answers and access, we are finally hearing from those within the LAFD who planned for and led the Palisades firefight. Here's Eyewitness News investigative reporter Kevin Ozbek.
To the people of the city who've lost trust in their fire department, what do you want to say to them?
We're going to use this as a blueprint for change, and we're going to be better.
And that starts by looking at the Lockman fire that sparked on January 1st and, according to federal investigators, smoldered underground for a week before the fierce winds whipped it into the devastating Palisades fire. On January 16th, then LAFD Assistant Chief Joe Everett for the West Bureau, which includes the Palisades, spoke at a community meeting saying he was out of town on New Year's but was on the phone with the firefighters at the Lockman scene.
That fire was dead out. If it is determined that was the cause, it would be a phenomenon.
I had full faith and belief that they did a good job, and I do today, and I stand by that word phenomenon.
According to this hose and equipment recovery memo obtained by 7 on Your Side, the hose left on the Lockman site in case of a flare-up was taken back on January 3rd.
That's a lie. This is a lie. I have verified evidence, verified, time-stamped, geolocated evidence of them pulling up their hoses on the morning of January 2nd. Okay? This is a lie.
Was that a mistake? Should those hoses have been kept in place longer? Should firefighters have been checking on that burn scar longer?
Well, I mean, in retrospect, I think that yes, but I'm answering that question knowing about the devastation of the January 7th fire. Did I feel confident with the officers that were on scene, with the firefighters and their boots on the ground, with the work they did? Absolutely.
Now, Chief Everett says to his knowledge, all mop-up procedures for the Lockman fire were followed. But from now on, the LAFD will be flying heat-detecting drones over burn scars. Chief Everett was the incident commander for the Palisades fire, calling many of the shots and making critical decisions like evacuations. We will ask him about all of that tonight at 5. Guys, have a great...
So were those tough questions, guys? Did they ask all the questions that you would have asked? Really? And were those satisfactory answers for you? Now, what gets interesting is he got promoted. So he was in charge of the disastrous Palisades fire, and he's been promoted. Meanwhile, the battalion chief in charge of the Lockman fire, he got moved. He got moved from Battalion 9 to Battalion 2. So that's the Central Bureau. So this is interesting. They're shuffling guys out, and then they're promoting the guys who are in charge of the worst disaster in the history of the city. What? What's really interesting is that I want to try to see if we can like pause on some of this footage, because you can see the battalion chief, Mario Garcia, who was in charge of the Lockman fire here. He's actually in one of these shots. Okay. What do you think it is? What do you think it is? If they're moving the guy who's like this mystery guy who nobody's interviewed the battalion chief, except for one person has interviewed this guy. One person has interviewed this guy, and he was completely unaware of all the controversy. Completely unaware. Had no idea. Now, he's been moved. Although I don't know what the deal is. The Palisades already burned. Might as well just leave him in Battalion 9. But what it feels like to me, they're going to try to put all the blame on him. I think they're setting him up, and we're going to get into why it may not necessarily be his fault. But I first want to show you, I want to get you guys caught up on like some of the reporting that's been going down on this. So like, you guys probably saw that the LA Times article, that was basically just echoing a story that Spencer broke. So this is what Spencer had broken. Like this was, what was it? October 8th or 9th. Spencer posted a text from an LAFD firefighter. Said, hey, I'm an LA City firefighter who was told to pick up hose on January 2nd in the Palisades. Remember how they lied and tried to say it was on the 3rd? There were several hot spots and it was definitely still smoldering. Tons of smoldering tree stumps still remained that needed to be dug out and water applied. I believe a hand crew needed to come in and mop up the whole area with water. He's talking about 100% grid. And that is absolutely what was needed on a small fire like that. Just wanted to let you know so you have the truth. I had a chief walk by me that day and I showed him a hot spot. He said it was good enough and we continued to pick up all the hose. I was using water that was draining out of the hose to put red hot coals out. I couldn't believe we walked away from that burn scar the way it was. I am almost 23 years on. I don't feel the fire from the first was properly mopped up. Now, Spencer broke that story. And then 2 weeks later, the LA Times, they stole his scoop. And they posted that same story. And then watch the glazing that the LA Times gets for reporting on this 2 weeks after Spencer Pratt broke this story. He got this whistleblower, right? He's doing real journalism. Watch the credit being given to Spencer.
Before the Palisades Inferno, firefighters were ordered to leave smoldering burn site. The report suggests that firefighters sounded the alarm about leaving, but they were not listened to. Joining us now is Paul Pringle, the Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who co-authored this piece for the LA Times. Paul, first off, thank you for this important work. Welcome.
Thank you for this important work. Is Spencer going to get a fucking Pulitzer? Spencer broke this story 2 weeks before the LA Times. Nobody was interviewing these guys. Nobody. That's the thing. We've talked to a bunch of people in the LAFD, including people who were on the Lockman fire. And they were like, yeah, nobody's talked to us. Nobody from the state, no state investigators have talked to us. None of the reporters have talked to us. Nobody's interested in this story. And then Spencer leaks this whistleblower thing, and he had permission to do so. And then all of a sudden, the LA Times is taking credit for the whole thing.
Welcome to the story is, can you sort of break down the main thing that you found here?
Yes, what we found is that the firefighters on the ground of the January 1 fire the next day were ordered to pack up their hoses and leave by their battalion chief, even though they said the ground is still smoldering in places, rocks are hot to the touch, their tree stumps are smoking or are also hot to the touch. And that's what they did. They did as they were ordered. They left the scene. And as the federal investigation determined later, and that people had suspected for months, when the winds arrived on January 7, it picked up those embers that were left behind on January 2nd and caused the Palisades fire.
This set off a firestorm. And now all of a sudden, we've rekindled the investigation into this fire. And now people are finally starting to understand why I've been saying this for so long. This fire stinks, okay? It stinks. I've been saying it forever. I had people in my DMs telling me I was a moron when I was saying it was a rekindle back in July. But that's because I read the lawsuit, all the great work by Alexander the Great. So we knew all this for a long time. And unfortunately, I've had people shitting all over me. And it wasn't until just recently. Now, all of a sudden, we don't even care about the arsonist anymore. That story's dead. Nobody cares about that because now we know, yeah, they screwed up. But there's something that everybody's missing. Now, Karen Bass immediately jumps on this now that the LA Times writes about it. Okay, because they're ignoring Spencer, even though he's the one like doing all this investigative journalism, and he's literally giving the LA Times scoops, and I mean directly, like to their reporters, like, guys, report on this, do some fucking work. But now that it's in the LA Times, it's real. Mayor Bass calls for investigation into LAFD missteps before the Palisades fire. Now, here's the thing. Why do you think she's doing that? Why do you think she's doing that? Now, here's something that nobody is actually looking into. Nobody. And it's baffling to me. I feel like I've been the only one saying this. Now, I mentioned from the start when I posted that video, this is what started it all off, was the video that I obtained from January 2nd when the hoses were gone and it was still smoldering at the Lackman fire. That video that I posted, that was the smoking gun proof that the LAFD left too early. Okay, that was the proof. They can no longer claim that they were there and they put it out. The hoses were gone. Okay. The thing that I said right away is you guys understand that the worse the LAFD screwed up, the worse it is for the state. And I know it seems a little counterintuitive. Everyone's jumping on the LAFD, but here's the thing. The state could argue if it truly were just burning underground, unnoticed, couldn't be able to detect it, you couldn't even use IR sensors to pick it up. Well, okay, then they have plausible deniability, and then it's kind of just an accident and it's nobody's fault, right? Here's the thing. It was visibly smoldering. It was visibly smoldering 2 days after the fire was attacked. So what you have is no excuse. If a layperson can look at that burn scar and say, yeah, that thing's not out, then the people at Topanga State Park have absolutely no excuse. It was visibly smoldering. So if LAFD did a good job and completely put it out dead cold, right, and it was just burning secretly underground, well, then State Park wouldn't be on the hook anymore because it's like, well, how are they supposed to know, right? Now, here's the other factor. What the LA Times and all the news agencies piling on LAFD are missing is that there was an A-rep, an agency rep from Topanga State Park and the MRCA on the Lackman fire telling LAFD all the bushes they couldn't cut. But journalists never bothered interviewing anyone. They just rely on our scoops. Did anybody know this until I tweeted about it? There was an A-rep at the Lackman fire at 12:30, right? So the fire went off like right around midnight. And there was somebody there interfacing with the battalion chief with a map pointing out all the plants and all the areas with protected plants. This is someone who's on Team Plant, saying all the places that LAFD couldn't cut and telling them you cannot take a dozer up there. Now, the thing is, all right, it's an 8-acre fire. Do you really need a dozer? No, you could line that out with a hand crew. And, you know, obviously they got it under control. Ken says Team Plant strikes again. Exactly. Right? If you guys recall, there are wooden power poles, flammable wooden power poles that became a problem and potentially ignited secondary spot fires up in the Palisades Highlands that were meant to be replaced back in 2019. But they weren't. They stopped the work. LADWP stopped the work because their bulldozer hit a milk vetch plant, which is a protected plant, which of course they're now all gone because they burned up, right? They stopped work. They never replaced those wooden power poles in that flammable area. They were going to put steel poles up there. But because they ran over a milk vetch plant, they had to stop. So you see over and over, Team Plant getting in the way of fire protection. This is why I keep saying it's Team Human versus Team Plant, guys. I love plants. I got a bunch of plants in my yard, but you know what I do with them? I cut them down and I burn them. And they keep growing back. And I have to keep doing this every year. My lawnmower is so freaking expensive. All the chainsaw, the blades that I have to go through, all the chains, it's unbelievable. This stuff keeps growing back. This is why we shouldn't be so upset. It's so stupid. Save the chaparral, Donia says. It's like, dude, it keeps coming back. All that stuff got nuked back in 78, and then it all came back. I don't understand why we do all this. But yeah, there was an A rep from the state. Has anybody talked to that agency rep? Has anyone talked to Armando Quintero, who was appointed by Gavin Newsom in 2020? I think on September 12th, this guy was appointed to run the California state parks. Okay. This dude knows about the threat of wildfire. He was quite literally baptized by fire in the middle of September of 2020. That was peak of the 2020 fire seeds. So he understands the threat of wildfire. Has any journalist bothered to ask him why his agency left the Palisades fire to visibly smolder on state property for a week? Do not lose sight of the fact that this is on the state, and you have multiple people who have an interest in having this investigation stop with the LAFD or stop with the city. Guys, the worse LAFD screws up, the worse it is for the state. I need you to understand that, okay? Do I have to go over the case law for this? Understand that the state is on the hook for this because of Vedder versus Imperial County. Okay, this is the case law. One who negligently stores gasoline and other highly combustible chemicals on his property and knowingly permits such negligent storage may be liable to others for a fire incurred loss, even though the fire was actually started by the negligent conduct of others. If an injury is produced by the concurrent effect of two separate wrongful acts, each is a proximate cause of the injury. So even if somebody else ignited the fire, understand that the state park had an obligation to secure that fire area, which they normally do. I want to show you this from the Palisades fire in 2021, which was a much smaller fire. Although, okay, granted, it was bigger than the Lackman fire. But closed to public entry, extreme fire danger. It is a normal course of action for them to close off entire sections of the park if there's a fire hazard. They didn't do this for the Lockman fire. They didn't follow any of their protocols for this. Okay, the state is on the hook. But understand that there are people who want the buck to stop with the city, including Rick J. Caruso. This is a very conspicuous tweet. And what's very conspicuous about it? Thank you, Bill, for highlighting this failure of leadership. Spot on. The buck stops with Mayor Bass. Do you guys notice what Rick has been doing? Do you notice the very conspicuous absence of Gavin Newsom in any of his conversation about the Palisades fire? Now, I've showed you how the state is on the hook and how Gavin Newsom is on the hook. Gavin Newsom and the state of California are defendants. They're like one of the main defendants in the lawsuit. Okay? Topanga State Park and California's Parks and Rec is absolutely on the hook for this. So why is Rick Caruso never mentioning Gavin Newsom? Now, the rumor is he's going to be running for governor or mayor. He's going to have to announce it relatively soon. Why is it he's always focused on Mayor Bass? It sort of makes you think, okay, well, he must be running for mayor again because he never attacks Gavin Newsom. Why are people so fixated on making sure that the buck stops with the city? Do not forget this. As we continue to proceed through this stuff, do not forget the state is on the hook for this. And you have a lot of people who have a vested interest in making sure that it seems like, well, let's just dump it on the firefighters. Now, a part of that is because firefighters get immunity. They get immunity. They can't be held accountable for their actions to a certain degree. Donia says he's protecting Gavin. This is 100% correct. So he's either running for governor and he needs that Gavin Newsom sort of like mafioso sponsorship, or he needs access to his fundraiser, or he just doesn't want to upset the Gav hands and doesn't want to be, politically martyred. I don't mean literally, like metaphorically speaking. That could be it. Or maybe he's just worried about the Gav hands touching his wife, because that's sort of what Gav hands is famous for. But it's really bizarre because, Rick Caruso, he sort of positioned himself as like the godfather of the Palisades. And yet he's been so bizarre with his criticism. He's so fixated on Karen Bass. Do you think maybe it's just like it's a grudge because Karen Bass beat him in the election and he's still bitter about it because he spent $100 million on it? I don't know. I think it's more that he's running for office again. He hasn't announced it yet. And he wants the Gavin Newsom support network. Casey K says Rick needs permits from the state for some of his developments. I bet that is a very good guess as well. The rumor is that Caruso has been snatching up a ton of properties around the area, like a ton of properties in a fire sale. But yeah, Rick Caruso, as I've said before, he's very lucky that he actually lost the election. He's very lucky because this same fire would have occurred under his watch. It would have been hung around his neck. And the very curious circumstance of his building being the only building in town to survive the fire, followed by his, further enrichment from the redevelopment of this brand new blank slate of a city, it would have cast a shadow of suspicion over him that would have purged him from polite society forever. So he's very lucky that he lost that election. But he's going to go again. He's going to go again. Do you guys think he's going to be mayor or governor? What do you think he's running for? His behavior has been very odd. And the fact that he is like very conspicuously excluding Gavin Newsom from this, it's like this is trying too hard. The buck stops with Mayor Bass. It's like, what? Who's saying that? I've actually been pretty forgiving to Mayor Bass. Now, I think it was a very bad PR move that she was in Ghana during this. I think she handled it very poorly. I think she did a lot of damage by reducing the budget, the LAFD, and not paying attention to the recommendations from like every major fire organization was saying, guys, you're operating the agency like it's 1965. You're not ready for a major urban conflagration or a major wildfire. You guys are screwed. And they're spending 85% of their calls to service are medicals. And a disproportionate amount of those are wizards overdosing. Okay, so there are certainly problems that Mayor Bass is, a primary source for that certainly made this disaster worse. But at the end of the day, it's like, even if she is in Ghana, who cares? She's not going to, like, what do you want her out there, like, directing where the fire trucks go? She doesn't have that kind of granular oversight of the fire department. This is something where you want a subject matter expert, like a fire chief, to be running that operation. You don't want the mayor running that. You don't want fucking Gav hands running that. So it's like, or Joe Biden. That's why, like, people who are, trying to put this on Joe Biden because it happened during his term. All right, that's unfair. Now, we did see that his visit to LA, unfortunately, it probably killed people. Okay. But I mean, honestly, how's he supposed to know that, right? How's the presidential advance supposed to know that? They're just trying to provide enough security for the president. It's like, how much are we going to get into this? But all that said, they should have had this as a contingency. Like, hey, man, we might need to split off some motorcycle cops. We should have a contingency for that. I mean, it's crazy. All right, so you guys all think he's running for governor. Barry and Donia, you both think that Caruso is running for governor. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's ego, or do you think like he's too scared of running for mayor? There's a part of me that I feel like he wants to run for mayor. I feel like that would be more helpful for him and his building, but I could be wrong on that. Maybe the ego wants to be governor. I just feel like, why would he want to go to Sacramento? You know what I mean? Now, speaking of the Gav hands, just to close this out, look at this. This is today. He's starting to, here's the thing. People are finally being instructed to subpoena people in California State Parks and Rec. And you saw, my tweet about this last week, trying to shine a spotlight on the actual individuals who are running California State Parks, because, dude, they're on the hook for this fire. And nobody seems to be, like, have you heard the name Armando Quintero at all in any discussion of the Palisades fire until I tweeted about him? Of course not, because nobody's like putting the pieces together. But now all of a sudden people are. And I've made some journalists aware that they need to be getting these people. There have also been public records requests that just came in yesterday from multiple agencies, from private lawyers, as well as lawyers within the federal government, are now finally soliciting public records from California State Parks and their employees. I don't know why it's taken until November for people to put this together, but the fire started on Topanga State Park. Why are you not doing this already? Now, in response, the Gav hands is amping it up. Environmental leaders, fire practitioners applaud California's efforts to expand beneficial fire this fall. What you need to know: following Governor Newsom's executive order to expand tools to safely deploy beneficial fire, including prescribed and cultural burning. I hate how they always have to include cultural burning. Look, I'm an Indian. I'm Choctaw Indian. Okay. I don't need these concessions. I don't need your fucking land acknowledgements. And like, dude, the cultural burning, okay, awesome. Respect the culture. Great. Respect my ancestors if you want. Just get some fire on the ground. Like, I don't care if you spend time praying over it. Just get a drip torch and get the work done so we don't lose homes and lives. California State Parks is ramping up prescribed burns to restore ecosystems and reduce wildfire risk. So all of a sudden on November 6th, 5 days after I'm putting the spotlight on California State Parks and Rec, California State Parks is ramping up prescribed burns to restore ecosystems and reduce wildfire risk. Leaders from across the state are standing behind this proven strategy, and they're sharing their support for the governor's order. You love how they're trying, Gavin Newsom is trying to own this. Like, oh, I just came up with this great idea. Guys, guess what? I came up with this great idea. What if we get rid of the fuels before the fire? I just thought of it. This is so maddening. Last week, Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order directing state agencies to accelerate and streamline processes for prescribed and cultural burning, and the state is already getting to work. Following the governor's call to action, California State Parks is making swift progress as it completed a series of prescribed burns at parks statewide, thanks to strategic investments under the Newsom administration wildfire packages. So, of course, all of this is political grandstanding, right? How do we know that? California is leading the nation in bringing good fire back to the land by working with tribes and local partners. Again, dude, guys, what tribe is living on Topanga State fucking Park? This obsession with like identity politics, like, guys, just get a bunch of dudes with chainsaws and some drip torches and just get the work done. Please stop with this performative bullshit. It's a waste of time and money. I'm telling you. We're restoring landscape health, protecting communities, and building the resilience California needs for the long haul. This is after all of these people have told me that fuel breaks don't work and there's nothing we could do. And yet here they are doing all this stuff to protect communities. So it couldn't have protected the communities if it had been done on January 6th. But if it's been done on November 6th, then all of a sudden it's protecting communities. I see how it works. Fucking morons. While the majority of California forests are under federal control, again, he's got to put in this jab at the feds. It's like, dude, like 0.2% of WUI homes are up against federal forests, okay? 40% of WUI homes are up against the state responsibility area. And keep in mind, the Eaton fire started in the state responsibility area, okay? And then it ended up burning into the national forest. So all of this nitpicking about federal lands and how much dirt the feds own, it is immaterial to the fires that we actually care about, which are the ones that destroy all the homes, the stuff that we don't want to burn. While the majority of California forests are under federal control and continue to lack real management under Trump, we're leading by example and moving at a record pace to reduce wildfire risk. Is that true? Well, let's check it out. This is that table I always tell you to look up. YTD, national year to date. Look out, YTD, state and agency, RX fire acres. Okay? You look up those words. This is going to be the first result that comes in. And this shows you state by state, wildfire acres and prescribed fire acres based on the agency. So let's have a look. California. Look at Alabama, dude. 969. Just so you know, the last column, because it doesn't scroll with us. Here are the columns. You've got wildland fires, wildland fire acres. Alaska's got 1 million acres. Dude, they had a big year. And then you've got prescribed fire numbers and prescribed fire acres is the last column. Alabama's got 969,000 acres prescribed fire. Holy mackerel. Arkansas, 187,000 acres. That's pretty good. What does California have? 36,568 in one of the slowest fire seasons in a long time. And who's doing that work? Bureau of Indian Affairs, Bureau of Land Management, CDF. That's California Department of Forestry. 583 acres. The Forest Service, 28,422 acres of prescribed fire. So here you see, dude, the feds have done, and that's just the Forest Service, because you got to also include Bureau of Indian Affairs, BLM. When you add up all of that, National Park Service, another federal agency, Fish and Wildlife, another federal agency. So when you look at it, it's only the feds doing prescribed fire. It's only the feds doing it. KCK says, heck, the bears are doing more than humans by grabbing chainsaws and heading out to clear brush. Yeah, you see that? That's from my dude in Eastern Tennessee. He posted that great video of a bear stealing his chainsaw. It's amazing. But yeah, look, this thing gets updated every day. So you can track who's doing the prescribed fire. And here you have the Forest Service. Yeah, they've got more dirt than CAL FIRE, but like, CAL FIRE's got all the homes. So it's like they need to be doing this work more diligently. And it's not necessarily about the acres. It's just about doing it in the right place. You know, it would have been like a 750 acre firing operation to protect the Palisades. And you would have saved like $50 billion in damage, right? But you could have a 100,000 acre fire on fed dirt and it doesn't impact anybody, right? This happens all the time. Like look at the Gifford fire, the Madre fire, right? They didn't really impact anybody, but they were like 80,000 acres. But if you have an 80,000 acre fire in the state responsibility area, you're going to nuke like $20 billion worth of homes. Okay. So all of this stupid like battling and just these stupid jabs that the Gav hands always has to like slip in there. It's so stupid. And it's just factually incorrect. Right? The feds are doing way more burning than the state. And they're not even close. They're not even close. Now they're advertising that they're doing a lot of prescribed fire. The thing is, these are very, very, very small burns. These are very small burns. So they really need to amp it up. Like I've been pushing this for a long time. It's been very obvious to me that fire season's been dead for a long time. When was the last time we saw a significant fire? There's been months. Sue Thompson says State Parks is doing a burn on Angel Island State Park in the middle of San Francisco Bay, reducing fire danger to 0 homes. This is what I'm saying. So much of what the state does is performative. It is performative. All of the cultural burning stuff, all of this ritual, again, I'm Choctaw Indian, okay? I have a soft spot in my heart for indulging in Native American culture, okay? But I'm also a pragmatist. And at the end of the day, I don't care if you have a shaman out there or not. I care about if you get rid of the fuels immediately surrounding the stuff that we don't want to burn. That's what matters. And it's like so much of this stuff is performative. Now, Sue attended the Red Sky Summit. The Red Sky Summit, which is put on by Bill Clerico, who's a great dude. And it is a wildfire industrial complex conference. That's what it is. So it's a trade show where all the companies that are, making these drones with little hoses on them that can, put out a barbecue fire. All these companies that are making, autonomous helicopters and like AI fire prediction mapping stuff. All of these people that are trying to, cash in on the wildfire crisis. They have this summit. And, to Bill Clerico's credit, he has a lot of great speakers who go up there. Sue should chime in, and maybe not now because I'm going to sign off soon. But tell us about your experience at Red Sky, and maybe make some posts about it. People should follow Sue Thompson. She's got some really great insights. But I went to the Red Sky Summit. I was invited to go to the first one, and this is right after I had put out Hot Shot. And so I think people saw some of my spicy takes on Twitter where I was bitching about how California is not doing any prescribed fire, and this is a nightmare. Why don't you guys care about it? It's like your tax dollars pay for this stuff. It's not getting done. Where's all the money going, Lebowski? And I went, and Bill Clerico's great, but you hear a lot of pace and scale, and you hear this like 10,000 times, at scale. We got to figure out how to do this at scale. And Sue, you can probably tell me, how many times did you hear the words at scale at Red Sky? And what I found is a lot of these discussions are a lot like my live streams. They're very redundant. And it's the same fucking thing over and over. We know what the solutions are. We're just not getting them done. We're just not getting them done. And this is what drives me crazy. Guys, we know what the solutions are. We're just not getting them done. I think there's money laundering going on with the whole prescribed fire racket in California. And I can tell you that that Congress is investigating this, which is good, because the amount of acres done does not match the funding, right? When you look at this, we're approaching the end of the year in a very, very slow fire year, and California's only done 36,000 acres of prescribed fire. And yet they have an endowment in the billions of dollars. They should be, even if they're doing it at the most expensive cost per acre, $1,000 an acre, they should be at least 500,000 acres of prescribed fire for the amount of money that's been allocated for this work. So where is all this money going? Nobody's answered this question. If you've got between the state government and also federal endowments to do fuels mitigation, you've got enough money. I think it's like $2.5 billion from the federal government and like $1 billion in California. You've got enough to do between 300 to 500,000 acres, and you're only doing 36,000. Where's all that money going? That's the question I want to leave with you. When you've got Georgia doing 1.3 million acres, California is at 36,000. Where's all this money going? Where's the billions of dollars going? Sue Thompson says, interestingly, at Red Sky, the insurance companies are starting to say that's what they want to see. Landscape scale work. All it took was a $50 billion fire disaster for people to finally realize what I've been saying over and over and over again. None of this other stuff matters until you get rid of the plants. None of it matters. None of it matters. And you have to start doing it like Georgia and Florida. You got to put millions of acres of fire on the ground. And I'd seen, Sue had sent me a report by the great Michael Wara, who, he's great. He's a lawyer out of Stanford, but he's contributed a lot of good stuff into the wildfire community, where they conceded that, yeah, back in the day, we used to have 4.5 million acres of fire in California every year. That was kind of the average. That was the natural burn rate. And it wasn't until 2020, when we finally saw 4.5 million acres of fire on the ground, that things started to balance out. And then, sure enough, like I told you earlier, within 2 years, you're dropping down into 300,000 acre fire seasons, back to back. And now here we have another one of 500,000 acres. So we've had several really, really low years. Like, this is what happens. You put fire in the ground, you get less fire. It's really that simple. So you might as well do it on your own terms. So at scale, are they going to do it at scale? I don't know. I'm pretty cynical. I'm super cynical. I don't think they're ever going to get it done. And I think a lot of this stuff is just performative bullshit from Gavin. In the same way that, the stuff that Rick Caruso is saying is performative bullshit. I don't like this. I don't like this. Something suspect about this. And I wish he would just come out and show what his intentions are. And maybe I'm too naive for thinking that's ever going to happen. But anyway, all right, guys, thanks for joining me. Sorry I went a little long, but there's a lot of stuff we had to catch up on. But I don't know. Maybe we'll do another one. I'm turning, what I got, 4 more days. 4 more days, I'm turning 42. And you know what? I'm still driving the ball 369 yards. That's right. You better believe it. So anyway, good chatting with you guys. Thanks for joining in the chat. Thanks for all your comments. Let me scroll through this. Sue Thompson says, Cal Fire put a dozer line around a 13-acre fire, middle of the night arson fire on parkland next to me. All right. So earlier when I was saying, why would you put a dozer on an 8-acre fire on the Lackman fire? Sue Thompson coming in clutch with the evidence that, yeah, they maybe could have and should have put a dozer up there. But of course, you had an AREP from the state telling them, no dozers, don't cut that. And by the way, in pictures that I've shown before of the Lackman fire containment line, it was a very small scrape. They weren't pulling out roots, and it didn't even look like they got out chainsaws, honestly. At least for parts of the line, it did not look like they actually cut it. It looked like they just did the bare minimum scrape and then got the hell out of there. Let's see. Many live oak trees survive the Woolsey. They can take fire. That's what they do. They hold a lot of water. Native plants can survive fire. That's 100% correct. The only way that they get endangered is when we suppress fire for too long and there's just too much overgrowth around them. And then it's like nuclear hot. They can't survive that. That's when it becomes too much. So like this whole cycle, it's no good. So we really do have to return fire to the landscape. And the thing is, these slow years, these are the years when you do it. This is like, you should never have a low acre fire year. You should always have 4 million acres. And so if God gives you just 500,000 acres from wildfires, then you need to add 3.5 million acres of prescribed fire. Because if it's a slow year and the conditions aren't necessarily conducive for big fires, that would be the time to do it on your terms. You're less likely to lose your burn. So it's like the fact that they aren't cranking right now and haven't been cranking for the last few months, because it's been obvious to everybody. Like, dude, this year ain't it. How many times you heard me say this on live streams? This, going back months, I've been saying this for months, even during peak fire season. This ain't the season. I'm telling you. So it's like, if a moron like me can see that, these people should know this. They should be putting fire on the ground. There's no excuse. I'm sick of this stuff. It's the only way we're gonna fix this. All right, guys, that's enough. I gotta get to bed. All right, love you guys. We'll talk soon. And remember, in this dystopian world of AI and drones with squirt guns, the only way to prove you're human is to do it live. Good night.